name is Conor Bredin. I'm an indie author, podcaster, the host of Story of a Storyteller. And but that's not my role today. My role today is to be the surrogate audience, because I'm getting to talk to Mario Dell'Olio about his book New Men, Bonds of Brotherhood, of which I am a big fan, both of Mario as a writer and the book New Men. How are you, Mario?
I'm doing well, thank you. That's quite a wonderful way to begin for me. Thank you so much.
Just keep inflating that ego. That's what you're paying me for. I mean,
There you go.
so I a little introduction for anybody watching. This concept is called a spoilercast. It is a podcast where the creator of something discusses their creation full of spoilers and full of all the questions that you might be dying to ask and get more information on, because that's exactly what I wanted to get out of Mario. And then I was like, hey, why did we make this a thing? So this is your final warning, anybody watching or listening, or however we're gonna give this to the world. If you haven't read New Men, Bonds of Brotherhood, first of all, why haven't you? That's ridiculous. And second of all, we are going to be discussing in depth key plot points and the ending of the book. So this is your final warning, I guess.
That's great.
So Mario, before we actually talk about the actual content of the book, what has the reaction been like to it so far?
Well, I've been amazed at the reviews I've gotten so far. They've been glowing, and it's not everybody's cup of tea, I guess, and yet it has gotten great praise from people who have lots of different interests in different genres. So I'm very happy with the response I've gotten. People have really talked about the fact that they couldn't put it down, that they really felt they were getting to know these characters and didn't know what was going to happen to them. They weren't sure about the ending, and we'll talk about that as well. But so far the response has been tremendous. So very happy.
And hands up, I'm definitely one of those people who would have said this genre is not for me. So I think that's a testament to the quality of the writing in the book, because I was very hesitant, and I'll admit most of the reason I started reading it is because you're my friend. But then that was quickly overtaken by, oh, this is really good. So it worked out for everybody.
Good.
So my first question, and I'm sure I hope I'm going to ask most of the questions people are thinking. And I tried to put my mind, when I came up with these questions, into the mindset of anybody that would have read this. So my first question is, are you still in touch with anybody you met in the North American College? And have any of the people you're in touch with read the book yet?
So yeah, the answer to that is yes. I'm in touch with a good number of the guys at the North American College from my time there. Some of us are very good friends still, and yet let's see, several of them have read the book, and it's interesting. I've gotten one of the guys read it, said he had no idea certain things were happening, but then he really reinforced all of the drama that was going on. He said, "Yeah, you captured it right on." And then others were like, "Oh my God, you could have gotten even more juicy in there." And I was like, "No, not that kind of book."
Yeah, because I think that's something that caught me off guard was the there is a lot of drama, and I did have a vague idea from talking to you outside of reading the book what it was about. But I was surprised at the whole thing of the debate of the Vatican II during your time there, and this kind of push of, which someone who isn't religious seems bizarre. There's a conservative wing of the church and a liberal wing within the church, which of course there would be. So that was a really interesting kind of subplot. Was that happening while you were there? Is that true to life?
Oh yeah, that is absolutely true to life, and I think what for me as a young wide-eyed idealistic seminarian, I was just, I was blown away by that. I had, I had dreams of this perfect institution, which of course, it's far from it. And the real push towards the conservative, more traditional church was very foreign to me, and it bothered me a great deal. I was like, this isn't what I signed up for. So there was a whole faction of us that were fighting tooth and nail against that change, and that wave was too strong. It washed over all of us, and some of it washed right out of the seminary. So
Yeah. Of course, that kind of attack, or not even attack, that kind of cause was championed by the character Miguel, which we'll get to later on.
yes,
But before we talk any more of that, out of the I was going to say fellas because I'm awfully Irish. Out of the men that you're still in touch with from NAC, how many of them are now priests? Out of curiosity.
let's see, of the guys so there's a handful of them that are priests. Two of them are bishops,
Wow.
actually, and yeah, and then at least one of them had become, no, two of them were priests and left sometime after that. And then several of us left before we became ordained. So yeah,
Yeah.
lots.
Have the bishops read the book?
I don't think so.
Well, if they're watching, read it, please. We want to know what you think.
Yeah, yeah, especially because the cover makes it look, well, the cover is very provocative, so it might be a little embarrassing to have that on their bookshelf.
Well, I mean, it could always be under the pillow.
That's true.
Yeah. So when I downloaded the book onto my phone, because I don't even have a Kindle, I'm that basic. I read things on my phone. The dedication that you have at the start really struck a chord with me, and I'd like to read it out before I ask a question about it, if that's all right. So you said in the dedication, to anyone who questions their intrinsic value or goodness because of who they love, may you believe in yourself. To all searching for true love, may you believe in yourself. And personally, I think that sums up the entire message of the book. And it really struck me afterwards, because I went back and read the dedication again when I finished. It seems like that is like, how early into the writing of the book was that dedication in your head?
Wow. So, it wasn't in my head in a sense of a dedication, but that is definitely the message in most of my writing.
Yeah.
Not even just this book. It's, you reach a certain age, and, I'm at a point in my life where I look back at my life and how I struggled to accept myself as a gay man, to accept myself as worthy to be loved. Going through that process during the 70s and 80s was a lot different than for young people, or not just young people, any person now. It's different. And that's not to say that I in any way say it's less difficult, because I think for the person coming out or coming to terms with their own sexuality, it is as significant to them now as it was to me then. The world has changed, but for the person coming out, that fear of being rejected by the people you love most, by your family, perhaps, by your church, perhaps, by your job, that fear is as real now as it ever was. Thankfully, we have more supports, and more role models, visible role models in our lives now. But that real fear of rejection is significant for each person as they go through this. So I don't want to minimize that in any way. But for me, like a big part of my teaching, as you know, I'm a school teacher, a high school teacher, and a big part of my writing is all about valuing oneself, and if you can't learn to love yourself, it's going to be hard to find somebody that loves you back in the same way. And I think that's a constant struggle. So for me, writing that at the end seemed just absolute as the dedication, because it was one of the final things I did.
Yeah.
It just seemed really logical. And I have to be quite honest with you, I gave it to one of my dear, dear friends, who I based one of the characters on, and in part. And she said, "Oh God, Mario, that sounds way too priestly." I'm like, like, well,
That kind of fits the book.
it kind of does.
I mean, there's only like three named characters I can think of that aren't priests.
That's right. That's right.
You said one thing there, and I'd like to kind of add on it. You said that I think about coming out and the coming out process. I think coming out to yourself and accepting yourself as gay or lesbian or bisexual or pansexual or anything on the LGBT plus spectrum, I think accepting yourself is always going to be the same level of difficulty, but I think it's the act of coming out to others and the act of being out that's what has changed and improved, thankfully, for most cultures and people. But again, like you said, that doesn't mean it's easy for everybody to be out.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Totally agree with that.
So to get talking about the real nitty gritty of the book, which I'm sure most people, if they're watching, will be like, "Would you come on?" It seems that all the events in the book were basically a very badly kept secret, even though you said earlier some people seem to be totally unaware of it. When you went to the NAC, when did you start learning about this badly kept secret? Was it early on in your days? Did you know before you got there, or did you discover it after? Like, when did you find that out?
So it was probably the summer before I left. All right. So I had graduated college, um, and I was, being welcomed and celebrated all that summer before, because I was going off to this very prestigious appointment to the Vatican seminary there. And so I began to get a sense of this subculture, and this, I guess, this, brotherhood, if you will, of priests and seminarians. And it was it was definitely an eye opener. I had no idea there were that many gay men in the priesthood. I had really no clue. I was so, in so many ways, I was so innocent. And, I was just, and then when I got there, I was just like, what? This is great. But, in many ways, it was within that subculture, within that it was more accepting, because there were more people that I knew that were gay, because I had gone to a Catholic college, and I wasn't out at college, that's for sure, not to very many people. So it was kind of eye opening, and it was new. It was it was a secret that I didn't know about, that I learned there. So
It must have been a very, like, for a young man who at the time was having to kind of mostly hide who he was, that must have felt very freeing. Because I know my first time going to college, when I was away from people that knew me when I was growing up, and away from maybe my family, finding out I wasn't out to at the time, like, for even on that basic level, I was like, yes, I can be myself and I can tell people who I am and it's fine. So I can't imagine what it was like going basically to a college of gay people.
And the thing is, it wasn't, there was a game that had to be played. You weren't sure. You had to be sure. So we played this kind of game, like, and I I was so new to the system, I wasn't sure what the banter was, and were they just being silly? Was this really, were they really gay? And that had nothing to do with, that part of it was, had nothing to do with whether they were having sex or not. It was just finding like kindred spirits, other people who are gay, having a community of friends who get it. And so in that first semester, in those first few months, it was a process of trying to find out who else was gay, but not revealing yourself because that was dangerous. You could get kicked out. So
Yeah. And on that, like, I don't know if you know any, or if you have this conversation with anyone, but for the very few priests, I imagine very few priests that were straight, like, were any of them kind of, would they have been like the most dangerous ones to come out to, in a sense, because they were the most likely to not be accepting of it, or like,
yeah, I can't really say that that's true. Because I think some of them were kind of clueless. Some of them were, if they had been at seminary for college, because a lot of guys went to college seminary, they would have been exposed to it and stuff. So it really depended on how traditional they were. It was more that,
yeah,
than anything else. It wasn't a straight or gay thing, because there are a lot of straight guys that were very accepting. It was more how
very,
conservative versus how progressive they were.
okay, okay. Um, the the book starts with a quite a dark event with the character Monsignor Kowalski. Um, so at the very start, Monsignor, to remind anyone that's watching, Monsignor Kowalski makes a pass at the character of Anthony, and when Anthony rejects him, Kowalski says, "In my position, I can be the gatekeeper to many unimaginable opportunities for you," which read very much as a threat to me anyway. So how common was it then for older priests or bishops or even monsignors or whatever to, especially those that were in powerful positions, to make a pass or to prey on the younger priests and seminarians? Was that a common thing in your experience?
So, I mean, those characters are based on real people, but I mean, we only have to look to the report that came out from the Vatican in December or November of 2020 about Cardinal McCarrick, who was an American cardinal who had a great deal of power, who had been using his power uh, to abuse seminarians and other priests for many, many, many years. And, he was defrocked by the church, but he was all the way along for many years, he was fostered by the very system that got him into power, and so it was common. It was a thing that happened. And the Pope's secretary was a real character. He was written about in a book called Inside the Vatican Closet, written by a French journalist. So he was a real character, and he used to do things like that. And it was well known, so yeah, so those kinds of situations, I mean, that happens in corporate America too, corporate everywhere, not just America. That people in power use that power to get what they want, and use, you know, uh, expect sexual favors or all sorts of things. I mean, clearly it's happened to women for centuries in the Me Too movement, and it definitely happened to gay people as well.
Yeah,
So,
it's it just, I remember reading it, and because it's such a surprise, because like you said about the cover, I mean, you expect certain things when you see the cover. And then at the end of the first chapter, this happens with Tina Kowalski and me, and I just remember going, "Oh, this is not the book I expected it to be."
yes.
um, so, like, then what consequences would there have been for seminarians if to reject, or even more strongly to report these advances of the people like the Pope Secretary and like Monsignor Kowalski?
Oh, we're talking a very deep hierarchical system. You know, just like in a work environment, you know, if you were to report a boss or a manager, you risk losing your job.
Yeah.
So I know of a very dear friend, actually, my life partner, my husband. Uh, he when he was in seminary in the United States, um, you know, his supervisor did something, came on to him, and then worked at, and when he was rebuffed, worked at trying to kick him out. So there were definitely consequences, and so, you know, it was always so wrapped up in self-loathing and guilt of the person, the victim, which is generally, you know, that's a
Of
psychological
course, yeah.
profile. I mean, that's what the victim generally blames him or herself, and you know, so and then you wrap all this religious environment around that. You know, this wanting to believe better about these people who are your shepherds. Uh, you know, it complicates it, and so yeah, I mean, you know, that's why this is such a big scandal in the church, you know,
Yeah.
because these are people who are trusted and we hold them to a higher standard, and some took advantage of it.
And I suppose as well, um, maybe no, I wouldn't say. I'm not going to say maybe not today, but I'd safely say that there's the a third layer. So you have the typical uh, guilt cycle that a victim of sexual abuse goes through. Then you have the religious environment, but then you also have the for gay people, you'll have that extra layer of, you know, I'm gay and that was a man that was coming on to me, or for women, I'm gay and that was a woman coming on to me. And the slight possibly wanting that experience, even though they weren't, you know, so like it's a really confusing situation to be in. And especially I'd imagine in a seminary when, you know, you're learning the catechism and you're learning about doctrine and stuff that preaches against that, and you're being come on to by a person in a position of power that will probably in a week or two denounce all homosexuals as evil on the paper, and it like there's just so much layers and layers to it that just adds and compounds to the guilt.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely, and you know, especially for young people, you know, who are just trying to figure out their sexuality, you know, uh, that becomes even more complicated, right? You know, if I wasn't gay, I wouldn't, this wouldn't have happened. You know, again, the victim blaming him or herself. You know, so yeah, no, I it's a very real experience, and this is something that, you know, any number of people I've interviewed and talked to about this particular, about those scenes in the book, um, it was a common experience for all of them, you know. So
Um, so we spoke a little bit earlier about there was during your time at the NAC, which I'm assuming that's what you call it. Did you just say NAC either? I
we
don't
just
know.
we called it knack.
Okay, because that has a different meaning here in Ireland.
What does that mean?
It's if you put er at the end of it, it'd be a really offensive term to the traveling community. Uh, so I'm just going to say NAC.
All right.
But while you were in the NAC, we were talking about there was some progressives and there was some conservatives. Was there ever any talk during your time there of LGBT acceptance?
Absolutely not.
I figured as much.
Absolutely not. There was not at all during that time period, you know,
Yeah.
um, which is sad, you know, very sad. And in fact, just a few years after I left, I wanted to finish up my master's degree because I had started it at the seminary, and that's what I based my master's thesis on, was the spirituality of gay people, and seeking acceptance within the church.
Okay. Speaking of acceptance of LGBT people, um, Anthony finds acceptance later on in the book when he speaks to his Uncle Joe, who at that stage is I want to say he's a Monsignor, is he? Or is he Bishop
Yes,
towards the end of the book?
he's in
Monsignor.
Monsignor.
So that was really surprising, and there was a lot of relief when I got to that. I was like, "Oh, brilliant! Like he has someone that's older, wiser that he can talk to, and whatever." And he comes out to his uncle because his uncle is also gay. But then you take that knife and you twist it, and it turns out that his uncle Joe Monsignor is not only in a gay relationship, but has contracted AIDS to the HIV, and what horrified me was he was dropped completely. That the Uncle Joe, I'm just gonna say Uncle Joe to make sure that Uncle Joe was dropped completely by not only his actual family, seemingly, but by his church. And what I found the most upsetting, by his partner, who it was implied in the book that they were together for quite a while. Um, and I'll be honest, that I found his story the most infuriating and the most upsetting in the book. I'm not sure why, but just that one really got to me. So, how much of that is based on reality, of an older priest contracting HIV and being completely ignored by the church? Ah, yep. Most upsetting his partner, and I remember reading that and being infuriated and upset, and there was a lot of emotions for me reading that bit. So how much of that was based on reality?
So during that time period, we have to remember that AIDS was a relatively new disease at that time, and what gay men who contracted AIDS were subject to was unlike anything else that had ever come before. The prejudice, the anger, the isolation. People wouldn't, ambulances wouldn't pick them up. Healthcare workers wouldn't care for them. You know, the even though it could be contracted through IV drug use and transfusions, there was a lot of stigma to the disease, and people were faulted for even having it
Yeah.
because they were gay. And that's where that whole innocent victims of AIDS came out. It's like, no, everyone who's got it is innocent. No one deserves it. Saying that makes it sound like if there are innocent victims, then there are guilty victims. So by contrast, so it did happen to a lot of people, and especially a lot of priests who got it in that time period where the church would never admit to the fact that the priest contracted AIDS. It was always death due to other circumstances, and because it would cause scandal, and they were embarrassed of it, and many families abandoned their gay children when they discovered they had AIDS. Part of it was fear of contracting it, because at that point they didn't really know that it was sexually transmitted. And, so, and the reason why I put that in there is because you can't talk about that period of history without dealing with that. And the fact that at the seminary, it was interesting. A friend of mine who beta read the very first draft. She said, "What? This is during the time of AIDS. How could people not be using condoms? You never mention it." And like, nobody knew to. This is pre understanding of that, and so that
I'm
was.
not sorry to cut across from her. I'm just checking. Um, was that when it was called Grid, or was that because like
Yes.
the time the book was set?
Yes.
Yeah.
right before it, it was the transition from grid to AIDS. So
For anyone who doesn't
while
know, GRID was stood for gay related
immunodeficiency,
immunodeficiency,
yes,
because they believed it only affected gay people for a very long time.
exactly. And so it was during that time period. So people were still using the term grid, even though AIDS had taken over as the proper name. But you know, people stick with what they hear first, of course. And we had a scapegoat. Society had a scapegoat. So that tale, though it wasn't truth, happened to many, many gay men, and it happened to many priests. The church did not deal well with it. On the other hand, when no one else was ministering to or caring for these dying men, a lot of the priests and nuns on the ground actually did. So there was this great contrast of what was being done in the trenches and the official institution's response to it, right? Which still is the way it is today in
I
many
was going to
regards.
say, yeah, that's kind of par for the course, really, isn't it?
Yes. So, and that's why I wanted him to, I wanted to deal with that because, the backdrop of that book, there were men in the seminary that contracted AIDS who have since died, so it had to be dealt with. And like I said, the book is not light. It's dealing with serious topics. Uh,
Multiple serious topics.
yeah. Um, and that's what I want it to be. I want it to be authentic to the time period, to the struggle, but also to the love that was found despite all of that.
Mm.
So,
But because that was one thing I did find um, really bittersweet, was like Anthony and his uncle Joe, or Monsignor Joe, had it. You could tell from the start of the book, had a really, really special connection and really special relationship. And there is a, I mean, I'll argue with you if you say I'm wrong, but I'm convinced that Uncle Joe always knew that his nephew Anthony was gay. And I think that might, a part of me feels like that's why Joe was so good to him and such a role model even before Anthony started in the seminary and before he had come out to his uncle. And I think that's one thing I found really sweet is that their relationship, even though the kind of uh, after coming out, the relationship improved so much,
yeah.
but it was so short. And the way that Anthony and Kevin cared for Anthony's uncle during that summer in the book was so sad and yet so beautiful in a way at the same time.
Yes, yes, I agree, and I think, it's often uh, when in times of need that the metal is truly tested, and that kind of intimacy is allowed because you break down barriers. You know, um, Perhaps the character would not have come out to his uncle if they had more time, if things were normal. Perhaps it would have taken longer. Who knows? Um, he might have feared
So
rejection.
let's talk about the main characters then, and more
Okay.
specifically about their three individual endings. Um, so we had Kevin first, who at the start of the book you could argue was the most devout of the three male main characters, and in a way he had kind of the most dramatic um, change throughout the book. He started out as very devout, definitely gay and definitely okay with being gay he himself, but his I feel like his vision of the road to becoming a priest was the most definite and clear at the start of the book. So
Yes.
then for him to have the ending of living in New York and just leaving the seminary and deciding to live as an openly gay man. And not only that, but to possibly have a first date with somebody or something at the very end. Like it was such a huge shift. So how important was it for you to have that ending of somebody completely escaping the I don't want to say the confines of the seminary, but like completely escaping that conflict of how can I be gay and be a priest?
So it was very important to me to make that real, and in that regard, it's not romance. Romance always has a happy tie a bow on it ending, and you know, Kevin, the character of Kevin is so many people in my life. You know, he is so many of these guys left the seminary, their dreams dashed, with great desire to be a priest and all of that. And then went on to live really happy, wonderful, fulfilled lives. And it wasn't because their vocation wasn't real. It wasn't because they should never have been in seminary to become priests. It was that that option was no longer open to them, and that if they wanted to live lives of integrity, being true to themselves, they had to leave. You know, and it's so interesting. So many guys from that time period said that yes, the best of us left. You know, and that's, you know, a lot of good people remained. I don't mean to be be judgmental, but a lot of good people left because of that. There are a couple of people who left who are married with children, you know, and went on to do incredible work for not-for-profit organizations and continue to do really good works. There are guys who are married to other guys and are doing beautifully and have now been with each other for over 20, 30 years, you know. It was important to me to have that glimmer of hope as well, where he meets this guy and they go and have coffee, you know, because, you know, for me, when I left seminary, I was devastated and I was in love with somebody who eventually became a priest. But I ended up meeting within months the person that I'm now spending the rest of my life with. You know, so
It worked out.
and that's, I think that's the other message of the book, Connor, is that when you're young and idealistic and we plan our lives the way we want them to be, we have these dreams, and then real life comes in and just like blows it all up. And it doesn't mean that what comes to pass is bad or worse. It's just different, and sometimes it's way better.
Yeah.
You know, like the person I was in love with back then, he's still a friend of mine, to be quite honest with you. And I couldn't picture us having our lives together, you know, like,
Yeah.
and, you know, and the person I'm married to now is the love of my life. So, you know.
So in other words, things work out, people.
They do. And that's why I didn't want it to be like, I didn't want to make believe that life always works out according to plans. Like, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. I won't lie. I was I don't want to say I don't want to say angry, but there definitely, for me anyway, there definitely was an underlying current of anger throughout the book, just at the things that kind of confined people like me back then. You know, the fact that people couldn't stay together, and the fact that people couldn't become priests even if they wanted to be and be themselves. You know, there were so many things of society and institutions telling them no. You know?
And that's the thing, that's the reality, and that is the reality even today in many regards. So, you know, why sugarcoat it? This is the way it is, you
Yeah.
know. And so, you know, in some ways it's like, buck up, you know, make your life, you know, you have to make your life good. You know, lick your wounds, feel the sorrow, because that's part of it, but then, you know, work at it. Like, we have power. We can make things, you know, when hardship comes, we have a choice to give up, or we can work really hard to overcome and learn from it. So, and obviously that's a theme in my first book. So
You've similar vibes going through all of your works. Um, so then that was Kevin, and then I'd like to talk a little bit about Miguel now. So Miguel, who falls in love with Maria, and the pair, which I was confused about and then really appreciated, they totally vanish from the book towards the end, and in a very subtle. It's not a happily ever after, really, you could say, because it's a happily ever after question mark. There is this big, will they be together? Will it work out? Um, so I really liked that. But I'm also annoyed at you because why did you give the only straight couple the happiest ending?
You know, that's it's very funny that you say that. Like it wasn't planned. I'm definitely one of those guys who is a pantser. I kind of let the story evolve, and I was like, well, what if? And the character of Maria, she's just so full of life and vivacious. And I have several friends who are like her. One in particular who, like, because of her joie de vivre, she could convince anybody that everything is going to be okay no matter what. And I thought, you know, she could get him out of his funk. She can take a trip to Europe and, like, just, see what happens, go on this great adventure. And that's what kind of, you know, it was her personality in the book that I was like, no, she has the power to kind of transform his sadness into happiness. And he just happened to be straight.
Yeah,
So,
so it worked out.
yeah.
No, no, I thought it was really good because I think my impression, I won't say my experience. I haven't read any books that you would classify as romance. Not that I classify your book as romance, but like it has three different endings in that you would put in a romantic niche, I suppose. And my impression of romance is that there's always a line drawn under it, and there's always like a full stop, and then it's happily ever after. And I just really like the will they, won't they, I hope they do kind of thing that Miguel and Maria got at the end.
Yeah.
It was a really interesting way to end a relationship in a book. And then finally, for the one that I'm most mad at you at, is Anthony's ending. And although we spend a lot of time with Miguel and Kevin, and there's many characters that we spend time with, you would definitely have to. Well, I would definitely pin Anthony as the main character, as the kind of number. I don't say number one, but like he's the one we spend the most time with. And he gets the worst ending. So Mario, what are you doing? So, as a reminder to everybody, after he finds acceptance and love for who he really is in his uncle then passes away, and that alone, and then we have the whole funeral scene, which we've talked about before, but I'd like to bring it up again. He's kind of almost, I don't want to say sacrificed, but he's held up and offered up by the priest or the bishop. I can't remember, was it the bishop that led the funeral for Monsignor Joe and the family, and kind of the hand is put on Anthony and said, well, isn't it great we have somebody to take Joe's place in the church? And when that, you combine it with the character Anthony's own confusion and his desire to be a priest, conflicting with his desire to stay with Kevin, and then this happens, and it just kind of seals the deal in a way that I didn't want to happen, but it did. So how close were you to the character Anthony with that kind of moment in time?
Oh, God, you're such a good interviewer. You always ask the hard questions.
They're always the most interesting and the most rewarding.
All right. Anthony's personality is me. Not all the things that happen in the book, of course, happened to me. But I did have a relative who was a priest who died. He didn't die of AIDS, but he died in that summer between first and second year when I was deciding to leave seminary. And that very moment actually happened. And I can picture to this day every face turning to me at my my relative's funeral, after I had already decided not to go back to seminary, and every face turning to me and acknowledging what the bishop said and feeling that I was trapped. I had no choice. And then, of course, my mother, you know, what gay boy does wants to disappoint his mother, so, but that moment was horrid,
Yeah.
horrid for me. And then I went back for another year, and and then met the love of my life there. So everything worked out great.
Right. Right. Um, I think
But
it's a testament to your writing, if I may just say it, that that scene, the only word that kept coming to mind was claustrophobic. I just, I felt as the as the person that was like reading the book and kind of in Anthony's head in that moment, I felt like I was trapped.
yeah,
Is that a word you say you would have felt in that point
yeah,
in your life?
without a doubt, without a doubt. And you know, it. I had a terrible um, semester, first semester, especially in seminary. It was. Like I knew that it wasn't the right thing for me, and it was a real struggle. So and eventually I found people who got me through it, and I found people who were good friends. I found my spiritual director, the guy who was in charge of the seminary, because I ended up not going back to Rome. I went back to a seminary in the States in Washington D.C. And this guy, this priest, was so good to me. He used to call me fathead. He used to call us all fathead. He goes, "Oh, fathead," and he'd rub my hair and he'd said, "You've got to be good to yourself. You've got to be good to yourself. You don't have to be anything you don't want to be."
Oh
You know,
wow. Okay.
he he was really he was like, "Follow your heart. Follow your heart. You're just as good in the seminary as you are out of the seminary." He had a very sweet way about him. And so I eventually left, and having met the person that I am now with for 28 years or so, but yeah, that moment was changed my life in at that funeral. It was at the interment at the mausoleum, so.
That's intense. Um, in a way, just that this your spiritual director in the second ceremony you went to. I mean, it sounds it's so weird that he is a bit of an outlier in a profession where you really want people to be absolutely 100% positive that they want to be a priest. And you
Yes.
would think that every spiritual director in a seminary would be like that. They would be, you have to be positive. Are you sure? Like, so it's so bizarre to hear that he was unusual.
Well, you know what? I mean, like he wasn't, but I think the fact that we weren't at the Harvard of or the West Point of seminaries made a difference. There wasn't this pressure. Being in Rome and in the Vatican, there was way more pressure to be perfect, you know, to measure up, and there were lots of good priests at that place in DC. Some that I keep touch with today that are really good men who did exactly that. It's like, come on, we're on a journey. You're on a journey, wherever it leads. You have to find out what's right for you. So, you know, um, you know, I think that Rome was just a very unique place because of where it was and what it was.
My last question for you, Mario, is probably the toughest one. But you got these questions before in advance, full disclosure, so you know it's coming. Um, how close did you come to ignoring the dedication in your book that we spoke about earlier completely and just becoming a priest and giving up a whole half of yourself or a whole part of yourself?
So the struggle was intense, and that semester that I did go back, I was like, no, I have to be a priest. Like I must be. Like that's what I'm supposed to do now. And no matter what my heart says, and and let me be quite honest, I wanted to be. I mean, the part of me that wanted to be a priest was the part that wanted to help people, to love people, to be their counselor, be their guide. And in many ways, Connor, and you know this because you're a teacher. When you're a teacher, you're all those things.
Yeah.
You know, but I didn't see that yet. At that point in my life, uh, I didn't realize that there were other ways to do the exact same thing. And so I was determined to make it happen. Um, and then, and I didn't let go of the dream for many years. So, and then um, it wasn't until a number of years later that I finally gave up on that completely. And it took me a while to come to terms with the fact that no, I needed to be true to myself. And part of being true to myself was knowing that I wanted to be in a relationship with another person, and falling in love with another man would really be part of what makes me whole. So it took me a long time, Connor. I'm pretty stubborn.
I know.
And in fact, with my present husband, we dated for a number of years, and then we broke up because I still wanted to become a priest.
Oh,
And to this day, and you're going to hear about it because if you watch the movie about coming about, we talk about it. We're interviewed in that. So
uh,
yeah, he just shook his head and he was like, "See ya."
wow. Mario, thank you so much for doing this. It has been really illuminating and really interesting. And you've written a fantastic book. I don't think there's much point in plugging New Men. If anyone's watching this, we're assuming they've watched it, or they've read it. But I've read Coming About, a different book that Mario wrote, and you have Body and Soul as well. And of course, hopefully another book in the near future as well.
I
Um,
hope so.
so yeah, thanks again for doing this.
Oh, it was a pleasure, Connor. Always a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Not at all.